So, I think it's safe to say that at this year's Six Nations, Wales really struggled at scrum time. We only just won over 50% of our own ball, and I think the issue is at Tighthead. And when you look at the cupboards, they're a little bit bare. So what I'm going to do is go through the options and see where we are. My name's Christian, and this is the Welsh Sports Podcast. So similar to the other two videos in this series, I'll start with the current players, and then I'll have a look at who might get called up and what I think will be the best options moving forward. So obviously I'll start with the current squad, and I would say the front runner at the moment is probably Kieran Azarati. Now, he's come on the scene over the last year. He's been very good for Cardiff, and his scrummaging has been very good for Cardiff. But for Wales, he's sort of been a little bit hot and cold. He had a little bit of an issue on his debut against England, but he seemed like he figured it out as the game went on. And then he was on the bench against Scotland for this Six Nations, and when he came on, he was really impactful. It seemed to sort the scrum out, the issues we were having at scrum time, and he's quite mobile for a big guy, and he really made a real impact along with the other subs in that position. The issue then came, he got given the jersey, and against England he was okay, but then against Ireland he looked like he got a real lesson, and he sort of never really recovered from that point in missing out in the final game. Now, Azarati's biggest problem is he's 5'10" and 18 stone, which isn't the biggest for a tight head prop. Just for reference, Winnie Antonio, who obviously is a freak, is 6'5" and 23 stone. So when you compare those two next to each other, you see the difference in size. That's not to say that he can't compete at the international level, because he certainly can. He's had very good games for Cardiff where he's out-scrummaged players, and he's really done a job on other props. So he's definitely got it in the locker. He's only had 9 caps, and he's 26. So 6 caps, and he's 26. So he'll just start coming into his prime now for a prop, which is promising. And I think there's a lot more to come from him. But I think he needs more time at regional rugby. He hasn't really played an awful lot in the grand scheme of things for Cardiff. So I think more time at international rugby, and he'll start developing. So I've got some hopes for him, and I think he's going to be a good option going forward. Now, my second player is the player who was generally coming on to replace him in this year's Six Nations, and that is Dylan Lewis. So Dylan Lewis has been around for a long time now. He's had 57 caps. A lot of those have been off the bench, but he has had plenty of starts for Wales. Obviously gone to Harlequins this year, and it looked like he's brought his game on a little bit. For example, in the games where he was coming off the bench, I feel like he was sorting out issues we were having in the scrum. When you look at that Ireland game particularly, I think he came on and he managed to sort out the issue of the scrum just going backwards at a rate of knots. And maybe, the tricks of just having all that experience, knowing how to deal with certain players, I think that certainly paid off. And in fact, I was actually calling for him to get a start following his impacts off the bench. The issue then happened when he got the start against Italy, and he wasn't the only one, but he was really poor. The scrum wasn't good. He was not his usual self around the pitch, which is what his biggest aspect is his ability around the park. I think he used to play number 8 when he was younger, so he's got that mobility that some props don't have. But it was at scrum where he was just having issues, and although he put in a good shift because Gatland was a little bit hesitant to use the bench with the young players we had on the pitch, I thought it was like a perfect encapsulation of just his Wales career. He's at opportunities where you think he's going to be the guy going forward, and then he has just a performance that isn't quite up to standard. And again, this could have been the game if he had a really good game against Italy, that we probably would have been looking at him as maybe our number 1 going forward. But now it's just he's just gone back into the fray with the other props that might be getting opportunities moving forward. But I think he's definitely up there still with maybe the lack of options the Wales have at the moment. And I think he's definitely got to be in amongst the squad because he's one of the better options. Another option who has been in and around the squad for quite a long time is Leon Brown. Now, everybody knows that his biggest issue is his injuries, But what Leon Brown is actually quite what we're sort of more looking for in a tight head prop. 6'3", 19.5 stone. So he's a big guy, but he's also got the athleticism. He's a decent scrummager, though that can be a bit up and down, especially in recent times with the injuries that he's had. I mean, it just shows the sort of how unlucky he's been with injuries. He made his debut for the Dragons in 2017, and he's only played 69 games in about 7 or 8 years. So it just shows how he's not managed to stay on the pitch. Though it's actually, I was quite surprised when I was researching this. He's had 24 caps, which I wouldn't have said he'd had that many. I thought it would be maybe in the teens, but he's had 24, but only 4 of those as starters. So when he's been fit, he's clearly someone that the coaches of the internationals, whether it be Pivac or Gatland, have wanted to give opportunities to, and you can understand why, especially at the under-20s level on the age grade. He was highly touted, again, for his size and athleticism and just general ability. But he just hasn't been able to stay fit, and it's just something that we always end up going back to when we talk about Leon Brown. He's still quite young, so he's still only 27, and as we said about Azarati, that is obviously coming into his prime as a prop. So if he can stay fit, I think he is someone that the coaches will look at as a real person they want to use going forward. Obviously, he was fit going into the Scotland game, and Gatland brought him in straight away, even though his form hadn't been great for the Dragons. So it shows that Gatland has some faith in him and really wants to go forward with him. But again, he just got injured and he's been out then. I'm not sure if he's played for the Dragons, but I don't think he's been back since then. So it's just very unfortunate. So I wouldn't bank on building around him. If he can get a run of form and fitness, then definitely give him the opportunity. But it's so hard to say you want to rely on him as your man going forward, because through no fault of his own, he just hasn't been able to stay off the physio bench. So he's one of the top prospects, even though he's 27, but he just hasn't really ever sort of fulfilled the promise he has, just because of injuries. Now moving on to someone who actually got an opportunity in this year's Six Nations, and that is Archie Griffin. Now, he was probably a real sort of surprise to most people. I was very surprised when he got called up for Wales in this year's Six Nations. I, to be honest, hadn't heard of him or seen him play at that point, so I had to do a bit of research. But he's a big boy, and he's the same sort of size as Leon Brown. He's the 6'3", 19.5 stone. So he is that sort of archetype size for Tighthead that we're looking for going forward. As I said, he was a surprise, but I think it was more Gatland wanted to have a look at him and maybe as more of a developmental piece. Unfortunately, due to injuries to Brown, then he was forced onto the bench, and unfortunately, he just wasn't ready. I mean, it's no surprise. That was his first cap. To this point, he's only played 6 games in the Premiership, and before then, I think it was only 5, and all those were off the bench. So he's not really played any games at all. He's only had 1 start for Bath, and that was in the Premiership Cup, which is more of a developmental side to that league. So he's got no experience. He's only 22, but he's obviously someone that Gatland likes the look of to give the opportunity. But he obviously got a bit of a lesson against Genge, I believe it was, and that's fair enough. Genge is a very experienced player now. He's been around the block. He's very athletic and strong, so you can understand that. And it's through no fault of Griffin's. It was just way too early for him. Now, it's hard to judge because there's so little to sort of film on him at the moment. Like I said, I've only seen a few games of him, so I've probably watched him in that Wales game and twice off the bench for Bath. One recently, he came back against Sale, and he's pretty solid at the scrum. Everything I read about him, all the coaches say that he's a bit of a beast at scrum time. But we obviously haven't managed to see it because he's not played at all. But like I said, he's 22, he's got a lot of promise, and I think he will potentially be a really good option going forward. Picked up a nasty little injury in the Six Nations, which put him out until about 2 or 3 weeks ago. But now he's back. I really want to see what's going to be important now is him getting game time regularly for Bath and starting to get some starts in the Premiership, because without that he's not going to be able to gain the experience, take the step up to the Six Nations, to the international. I think we might still see him involved in the summer tour because Gatland might want to be forcing that experience on him and keeping him in amongst the squad, which I'd be more than happy to see. Not sure still again if he's ready to play, but it'll be interesting. I think he grew up in Australia, so going back to Australia for the tour might be something that he really would benefit from and stuff like that. So yeah, Archie Griffin I think he's one of the best options for the future, but I think he just needs a little bit more time going forward. And then the last one who's been in the squad recently in this year's Six Nations, and that's Harry O'Connor, another young guy, only at 23. He's 6 foot and 18 stone. He's obviously only had the one cap, and he also had one cap against the Barbarians, which was an uncapped game, and they were both off the bench. He's another one who Gatland clearly likes the look of, because he's sort of forced him into the squad when he hasn't really had the best form for the Scarlets or that much experience. Again, these guys are young, they're 23, and you don't really come into your prime as a prop until you're much older, because it's such like a hard-dogged position where you need to learn the dark arts and you just need experience. So again, he's a young guy who hasn't played an awful lot for Scarlets even, only 31 times, so he's not got a lot of experience. He has been part of the under-20 setup, so he's got caps there. And he's more that sort of mobile prop. I think when he came off the bench against Italy, he was quite impactful. Lucky really that front row didn't have to scrummage much, but I think their impact on the pitch was noticeable, so that is definitely a tick in his box. My issues for him, and it's something I've talked about with the Scarlets many times, same with Matthias, I've never really seen him in a scrum that has been anything other than struggling or going backwards, and that's something he needs to work on. But again, very young and just needs time, and the Scarlets have just been in such a bad sort of state at the moment that it's hard to judge players on their performance at that level, I guess. But he's just another one who needs time. I think he's penned a new deal recently with the Scarlets, so they obviously see a future in him, and Gatland obviously sees a future in him because he keeps bringing him in and giving him opportunities in the squad. And, we'll see. We just need to see game time from him and see how he develops and whether he can really work on that scrummaging game moving forward. So those are the guys who've been in and around the squad in the last year's sort of Six Nations. Now we'll look at the guys who are a little bit on the outside. We'll start with Thomas Francis. It seems like they decided by mutual consent that they didn't want him in the Six Nations squad. I don't know whether that was his decision mainly or Gatland's decision mainly, but Gatland did go very young, and he only brought Dylan Lewis, who was the most senior prop, into the squad after an injury to Leon Brown, so you sort of will take Gatland for his word on that. So I think we know what we've got in Francis. I guess in a pinch he can get called up if we're really desperate, and he's happy to do it, so we'll leave him there. Although I think the last couple of years where he was in this squad, I think he was way past his best that he has shown for Wales, so I think maybe just leave him in France and just say thank you for your service. Another one it was a bit of a surprise when he played in that Barbarians game, a little bit out of nowhere, and he's not Welsh, was Lloyd Fairbrother. Obviously big stalwart of the Dragons, a lot of Dragons fans like him. I think he was good in that Barbarians game, and he looked really up for it, and he was flying around, and it was really nice to see. I think he's got Welsh grandparents or something anyway, so it wasn't just by residency. So I don't think he's something that Gatland is looking for. I think it was more of a stopgap, but he is there in amongst the Dragon squad if necessary. But I think that would be sort of a real desperation. We need a senior player to come in. There's other senior players that can come in instead of him that are better, in my opinion, and one of those is Tom Botica, who's only just qualified for residency as the Six Nations finished. Now, I think Botha is someone that Gatland 100% should draft into the squad. Okay, he's 33, and he doesn't really do an awful lot other than scrummage around the park, but Adam Jones made a brilliant Welsh career from more or less doing the same thing, and I think I don't need my tight head to be going around doing a lot if his scrummaging is as dominant as Tom Botha's is. And I mean, by all accounts, every interview I've seen, I think it was Alex Cuthbert was saying that Botha just he just loves scrummaging for some reason. Sounds like a crazy person to me, but and when you watch the Ospreys, I mean, you can just see how dominant their front row is. It's insane, really, how not more of those players are in the Welsh setup, but that's a video for a different time. But I think Tom Botha is a good option. If you don't want to bring him in to use him, because obviously he's not even Welsh, he's 33, what are you really going to gain from it? You've got to remember that these guys scrummage, you know, in camp against each other, and why not pick the best scrummager possible to improve the loose heads? Like, if that's the only reason you're going to use him, like, I think that's a good option. But I think he should be someone who could be a stopgap a year or two, just as these young guys develop, the likes of Archie Griffin, Harry O'Connor, get some time in the saddle. I would use Tom Botha. That's what I would do anyway. And then moving on to guys who are a little bit more on the outside, but a bit younger. One who I think has some good promise is Rhys Henry. He's 25, so again, he's sort of at that middle part of his career where you start developing as a real good scrummager. Not the biggest. He's 5'10", 18 stone, which, you know, is obviously big for average people, but not really for a tight head. He's been involved in the under-20s, so he's been involved in the Wales setup. But I think he's got a bit of promise. He's been playing behind Tom Botha, but there hasn't been a huge amount of drop-off at scrum time when he comes on, which is obviously very, very a real sort of tip of the cap to him. He can actually play on both sides. He can play loose head as well if necessary, but I think mainly he's playing tight head, and that's where he would be better suited, in my opinion, just going at that position and just getting good. I think we've seen at times players try to flirt with both sides and they become sort of the master of none. So I think he could be some potential going forward. He's had a decent season for the Ospreys this year, and he's had a couple of big games in Europe for them last year as well at scrum time, and it's just that scrum for the Ospreys is just crazy. And when you think there's lots of Welsh players in there, just why are they not translating it to the international level? I don't know. But yeah, Rhys Henry's a good option. Keep an eye on him. He looks like he's about 40, even though he's 25, and that's no disrespect. So you'll notice him. But he's a good prospect going forward, and I think as he gains more experience, he'll gain more game time at the Ospreys. So one to keep an eye out there. Another one to keep an eye out, and this is a little bit even more of an outside bet because he's a bit down the pecking order at Cardiff, and that's Will Davis-King. The reason I sort of bring this up is because there's someone that Gatland obviously likes to look at. He brought him into the Wales World Cup warm-up setup of that massive squad he had, and clearly wanted to have a look at him, and it's understandable. He's 6'4", 20 stone, so he's one of the bigger units at Tighthead, and that is something that we've been lacking, as we've spoken about in this video. The problem is he's not really played much at all for Cardiff over the last 3 or 4 seasons. He had 31 appearances overall competitions for Wales, so it's obviously he's lacked that experience, but this year he's got more game time, and when I've seen him play, I've been quite impressed. He's quite impactful around the pitch, and his scrummaging has been solid from what I've seen. So he is an option. He's very much, again, like I said, on the outside looking in, because I think he's probably third choice behind Azarati and Litterick. But again, when he's had an opportunity, he's been very good, or he's been pretty good. So I'd like to see him getting more game time. And I think as sort of he gets a little bit older, again, he might be one of those players who develops later and makes a little bit of a push for a starting position and battling it out with Kieran Azarati. So as you can see, there are some options knocking around. The problem we have is there's no one outstanding candidate. I mean, again, you'd say Azarati's probably got the best chance at having that jersey at the moment, but he's not really done anything to say that he's going to be starting going forward constantly. Leon Brown has dealt with so many injuries that we don't know if he's going to be fit. We know what Dylan Lewis has got in the locker, and he's not going to be the man going forward, even if he has a few appearances over the next year or two. I guess you need to look at maybe one of the younger guys, the Archie Griffin or Harry O'Connor, if one of those can develop over the next few years. I think, in my opinion, Archie Griffin is probably my favourite option to develop. From what I've seen, the little that I've seen from him, I've been generally impressed, and everything I read about him, he gets a lot of hype from all the coaches and players who've interacted with him. Harry O'Connor's still very young and got lots of developing to do, but I haven't seen from him what I think we need at international rugby. But again, so young that there's so much time for these guys to develop. And outside that, I think Rhys Henry is going to be a dark horse. I think he just needs time. I think he's been quite unlucky with injuries earlier in his career, so we just want to see him get some game time and, again, develop into one of these players. But that's my thoughts. Let me know what you think. I'll catch you on the next one.